People don't remember your failures; they remember your successes. And so don't be shy, right? There's a lot of risk involved in venture capital, and you can do your best in terms of your methodology of how you select founders, and we do that. At the end of the day, you got to take some shots on goal.
This episode is brought to you by Momento NFT. Momento NFT is a direct-to-fan social NFT app that allows fans to own viral moments from their favorite creators and unlock perks like meet and greets, autographed merchandise, and more. As a creator, you can easily create valuable images and video NFTs of your best social content. And as a fan, you can own viral moments from your favorite creators and unlock perks like meet and greets. Momento NFT is backed by Animoca brands Zenza and Mark Pincus. Check out the app available on App Store and Google Play. So to start off the show, so to give the audience a little bit of background, you were originally from LA. You grew up a little bit in Ukraine, and then you went to GSB and then work at DFJ, and then now you're at a fund that you joined as their first venture partner. And to start the show, tell us more about what you learned early on in your career that kind of you took on to your venture job.
Yeah. Well, actually, originally I am from Ukraine. So I grew up in a city called Odessa.
Mm-hmm.
And my family, we immigrated in kind of towards the end of the Soviet Union in 1989, and went through a crazy, arduous immigration process that took 6 months, and it was kind of like a Underground Railroad style, escape from communism, and we ended up settling in LA when I was about 7 years old, and kind of starting life from scratch, where we my parents worked night shift jobs. My mom worked minimum wage, and my dad worked night shift. So it was kind of a started from the bottom type of story there. And it taught that sort of early experience taught me a lot in terms of determination and trying to prove my parents' sacrifice. They obviously did that to give me a better future. We're also Jewish, so we came from a very anti-Semitic place at that point. So there weren't too many opportunities and quotas and all kinds of horrible systemic problems for people of our background. So America obviously is a place of opportunity. And so as an only child, I felt like a particular drive to succeed and justify kind of my parents' sacrifice there. And when I was a kid, I really wanted to go to Stanford. That was kind of a goal that I set for myself early on. Was lucky enough to get admitted to go there, which is kind of where I first got my first taste of Silicon Valley and what entrepreneurship was all about, just being surrounded by all that. I was lucky enough to participate in a program there called the Mayfield Fellows Program, which is sort of this work study program that takes 12 technical, more engineering-minded students every year and teaches them entrepreneurship as sort of like a boot camp for would-be entrepreneurs. And you get assigned VC mentors, you get assigned entrepreneur mentors, and then you actually have to work at a startup. And then you share that experience with everyone else. And my year, which was in 2005, I was lucky enough to have an incredible cohort of folks, people like Kevin Systrom, who ended up starting Instagram later, Josh Reeves, who started Gusto, Evan Tana, who's an accomplished VC, and many, many others who are just phenomenal leaders of industry right now. And so these are kind of the people I came up with. And through that experience, I ended up working at my first startup, which is a company called OOMA in the consumer electronics voice over IP space, where I was the first employee, helped build that company from scratch, took all my entrepreneurial, lessons the hard way by, literally being on the ground floor of something. And this company was backed by DFJ and Founders Fund. We built a great, really complicated product. It's still around to today. It's got 2 million subscribers, 150 million revenue. It's a public company. I was there for the first 3 years getting it off the ground. And that was sort of my entree into the entrepreneurial world. And then, as you mentioned, I ended up joining DFJ, which is one of our backers, which is kind of how I got into venture capital in the first place, and then ultimately ended up at Javelin over a period of time.
That's really interesting. I didn't know, you mentioned about the Mayfield Fellow before. So I didn't really know that was kind of it sounds like the YC of its day.
It wasn't so much like you have to go build a company right now. It was more about the educational parts of it. But yeah, it's a little bit of like a MBA on steroids specifically for startups and for the startup world. And it really was, I think a lot of the folks that have gone through that program, it's been going on for almost 30 years. So every year there's 12 new, folks added to it. And so there's a pretty
Only
large
12?
alumni group. Yeah, it's only 12 per year, at least at Stanford. And you are kind of instilled in this sort of entrepreneurial path. Not everybody goes down that path, but a lot of people end up as entrepreneurs or working at
Hmm.
tech companies or ended up being in venture capital at some point. And so it's a pretty awesome network that's really, specific to entrepreneurship. And I think by being around all these other entrepreneurially minded people, you kind of learn from them, you see what they're doing, and that's inspiring. And then you also see, what prior cohorts have done, right? So yes, it's like YC in the sense that it's educational and you kind of go through, these case studies and you meet incredible entrepreneurs along the way, and you've got this network of folks who are just, there to support you. But there isn't like a, hey, you have to start a company at this moment. It's sort of like when the time is right, you'll start a company, right? And or you'll be a part of the company building process in some way as an investor or as a, product manager, an employer, or something like that. But it's more to get people exposed to it, and it was honestly very foundational for me, and very eye-opening. My mentor during that experience was Peter Fenton, actually,
Oh, wow.
who's one of the top VCs of all time. This is when he was still at Excel, and so being able to kind of see him at his kind of early to mid stages of his career and learn from him was incredible. And there were many others that were very impactful for me along the way.
I feel like it sounds like, you grew up in like a humble background, and then like right now you're extremely successful, and then you're surrounding yourself with like so many really amazing, accomplished people. Like, who do you think is on your personal board of advisors to guiding you throughout this journey?
Hmm.
Since like you probably wouldn't get like a lot of help from the family or from like people who who you grew up with.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I definitely got help from family, but it was more like emotional, support, right? And but my parents, they didn't really, what was up here in in the US and the way to, pursue entrepreneurship or whatever else or any other career. They were more, instilling educational lessons into me and making sure that I was on the right path. But in terms of, yeah, the personal, sort of the board of advisors, I kind of think about it in five buckets. To me, there's the people that have sort of whatever you end up doing, right? And I have
Mhm.
my specific for venture capital, but it applies to any career. There's the people that have paved the path before you, who have done it before, and you could look up to them and learn from them and, take their lessons. There are, folks that are, your peers or even your bosses, right? Who, if you're lucky enough and you work in the right condition, are, mentor-like figures for you, right? I think it's important to have somebody that comes from outside of your immediate profession to give you that external perspective. I think that's really important. And, the fourth bucket would be, somebody, ideally you have like a friend, like a best friend that is
Mhm.
also in your industry. So every time you're talking to them about life or in general catching up, it ends up being a coaching session.
Mhm.
I think
Who
that's a
is your
really
best
good.
friend?
Yeah, well, so I mean, I've got a few good friends, but so for me, I'll just go through those buckets, right?
Mhm.
For, the people that have paved the path before and kind of model yourself after them, if you're lucky enough, definitely Stanford had a big part of that. So people like Peter Fenton. At the GSB, one of my professors was Andy Ratcliffe, who's the founder of Benchmark. Peter Wendell, the founder of Sierra Ventures. They've been very instrumental in, sort of helping me in my venture career and giving me guidance along the way and being inspiration. So that's been awesome. In terms of, my peers and bosses, I'm lucky enough that the entrepreneurs that I work with, a lot of them are my coaches and mentors and advisors. The founder of MasterClass, David Rogier, him and I talk nightly. And I should be coaching him, but like that's a big the other way around sometimes. And so that's been great. And that's along, all dimensions, career, personal, whatever it might be. My partners at Javelin, Jed and Noah have been phenomenal mentors to me. So that's been a great bucket. And then, in terms of my best friend, Don Huang, actually, he's a GSB classmate of mine. He ended up having a great career in entrepreneurship and technology. He was at companies like Revolut and Uber early days and Cloud, and now he's a VC at Atomico. So him and I kind of do similar things, and when we catch up, we're just propping each other up and making sure that we're on a good path and we're kind of coaching each other through this path. And I think that's an unfair advantage to have somebody you're that close to that's kind of going through some similar experiences where you could, kind of, bounce ideas off each other and be each other's mentors. And then the last bucket I think is super important is having mentors and coaches for your personal life. I think that's kind of goes underrated, many times. And there's now that I have a family, I have two kids and one on the way. Oh my God, I needed that advice almost even more than career advice sometimes. So I've got that, and sometimes they overlap, right? Like my friends, my partners at Javelin, they're also my personal life coaches, right? In terms of helping me navigate all the other craziness going on. So I think that's also, incredibly important.
It sounds like you are really good with like, surrounding yourself with great people. And I feel like in venture, that's definitely like a really great skill to have. What would you say is like one skill that you're constantly trying to get better at that you see like it's a really important skill and then you personally
Yeah.
spend time and effort to build on?
To think a lot about that. At the end of the day, I feel like, especially at early stage venture, kind of seed, early Series A, I think you have to be a company builder to really add value and help companies set the right foundation. And the way to do that is through helping the entrepreneurs get the right people into the company. So to me, that skill is really recruiting. I think that is something I'm constantly trying to be better at. And recruiting and sales, I think, are intermingled a little bit because obviously, if you're recruiting somebody, you've got to
Mhm.
sell the vision, sell the dream of the company. That's a big part of the skill set. But to me, even the sales part kind of goes underneath the recruiting piece. And I really enjoy working with my founders and kind of helping them identify gaps in the team, identify potential people that can potentially join the journey and kind of be the perfect complement to them and at those early stages. So I like to either, help them source candidates sometimes myself,
Mhm.
screen candidates if they're running if they're running a search or something like that. And so I get pretty involved on the recruiting side. And I think a lot of, venture capitals will say that as well, that that's like one of the top kind of skill sets. But if I had to identify one that I wish I was even better at and could have superpowers in, that would be the one. That would be the one because I think that's the biggest value add you can potentially add to an early stage startup, and it's also tangible. You can point back and say, "Hey, I helped you with that." Right? I helped
Mhm.
you bring in this VP of engineering or this VP of sales or whoever that is, and that
Mhm.
person ended up doing X, Y, and Z for the company,
Mhm.
right? If you did a good job, right? So for me, I really enjoy that part of it, and it feels like actual company building. So to me, it's the recruiting piece.
For sure. Do you have like a specific method or tool that you use? Because I've chatted with other VCs and then some people
Hmm.
have like internal tools that they've built to create this like talent pipeline or like there's people constantly hosting events or dinners to like kind of scout talents or how do you guys like, build up this I guess like recruiting arm when it comes to helping portfolio company recruit?
Yeah. I mean, it's multifaceted, right? I mean, that's what you heard is accurate. Everybody has their own kind of way of doing it. There's obviously for me like having kind of a goodie bag of like recruiters, right? Or retained search firms who are really good at certain functional areas. Like this is the right firm to use for a COO search, or this is the right firm for VP of sales. Knowing who the best recruiters are, plugging them in, and knowing how to interface and how to get the most out of them, that's
Mhm.
certainly one thing, and that's something that we bring to bear. I actually just honestly do what a lot of recruiters do, like hit up LinkedIn, go figure out second degree connections, and do the dirty work. Like, don't be afraid of that. I feel like a lot of VCs are afraid of that. Like, they don't do that. They want some sort of glamorous kind of thing to happen, but like just go and do what the recruiters do, right? And I think as a board member or as an investor, you've got a little bit of an advantage there because
Mhm.
if you've got a first or second, obviously if you have a first degree connection, that's straightforward. If you have a second degree connection, you can reach out and say, hey, I'm an investor or board member in this company. Like you get a pretty good response rate on that. So I'm just not shy about doing that. And like sometimes I'll proactively do that with founders and like I'll send them a list of like, hey, here are folks for this particular role, and they're like blown away, like what? Like
Mhm.
we don't get VCs sending this to us usually, right? So
Yeah.
there's no like magic to it. It's kind of really rolling up the sleeves and doing that. We also have a head of talent at Javelin who helps us as well. And her name's Lena. She's fantastic. And she helps more like director level, mid-level roles, but for VP and above, we want to be involved ourselves and
Mhm.
really be partner led in that from that standpoint.
For sure. Like when you're hitting up people like cold, how do you instantly like I mean, like I feel like from LinkedIn, it's really because I'm super active on LinkedIn every day. So
Yeah,
I feel like it's really easy to be distracted by like whatever they put on there than compared to what the person actually did.
right.
So I'm just curious, like, is there any good way for you guys to do due diligence on that person besides like, maybe chat with the first degree
Yeah.
connection. Like, hey, do you know blah 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 blah.
Yeah, well, yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, we don't try to go in cold. Like, if ideally there's like a second degree connection, and you could try to go through that, as hopefully it's a good contact, and they know, both sides well. It's not like a random LinkedIn connection or whatever, right? So you got to ask a lot of people, right? We put a lot of emphasis in terms of recruiting, a lot of emphasis on back channel. There's obviously there's primary references that you do, and you get those directly from the candidate, but like we will not make a hire if we can't get a good back channel to really try to get a sense of what that individual was like, what they actually did at their old job. And then the other thing, and this honestly it applies to how we select entrepreneurs when we, evaluate companies as well. But yeah, and specifically in the recruiting process, you got to put them in live situations, brainstorming sessions, projects, put them on tilt a little bit, right? Throw
Mm-hmm.
out some controversial questions, right? And see how they respond. That's something that, we always strive to do, or at least, push our founders to do that, and the best ones do. And so it's not necessarily like a quick, hiring process. Like this person had the right resume and went to the right school and had, was the CEO of this company, so that must be good. Like let's hire them. Here's an offer. We'll go through the paces, and if that person disappears because somebody else did that, that's fine. Like you keep going. And sometimes these searches take, a long time. Like they could take six to, sometimes more, 6 to 9 months for the right for the right individual. But I've just seen too many times where you bring in the right profile, the right person, and it makes all the difference. You don't want to sacrifice on that, um, especially at that kind of VP and above level of responsibility. Yeah.
Speaking of, like working as a VC, right? Like, so you originally work at like DFJ and then you joined Javelin when your partners, like one of them started Move.com, the other one started Google Earth. Like, how did you meet these two people? And I think
Mhm.
one of them, based on my LinkedIn stalking skill, so one of them worked at DFJ. So like maybe that's
Mhm.
how you guys know each other. How
Mhm.
do you kind of like build the relationship with partners at the fund or managing directors at the fund? And then like, when you join, how did you kind of like establish yourself in the industry since it's well, I guess back in time it
Yeah.
was not really super competitive, but like now it's, I feel like there's
It was
so many.
competitive, yeah, but yeah, I hear your point. It's more competitive now. The way I got to know Jetta Noah, you got it right. Your LinkedIn stalking paid off because it was exactly it was exactly that DFJ connection, which is interesting when you kind of trace back all the paths, right? You know, doing Mayfield Fellows allowed me to work at this company OOMA, which was backed by DFJ. I got to know the DFJ folks. They brought me on. They actually brought me on to do something completely like off out of left field. I helped them start a venture capital fund based in Eastern Europe, focused on the former
Mhm.
Soviet kind of countries. And for me, I didn't even think about going into venture. I just thought about, well, this would be a fun new adventure. I'm from that part of the world. I speak Russian as my first language. My second, I did 2 degrees at Stanford. One of them was international relations. So it was kind of like, hitting on a couple of threads in my life: entrepreneurship, technology, and international relations. So I did that. And so I was in the DFJ kind of orbit and network and had an office on Sand Hill Road and all that. DFJ had multiple different funds. They were well known for this sort of like franchise model of venture capital. They had funds in, India, China, all over the United States. And one of my current partners, Jed, was in the New York affiliate, the DFJ Gotham. And
Mhm.
so we knew each other through that network and had interacted. And I remember when he left DFJ Gotham to start Javelin with Noah, it caused a bit of a stir. And it was like, oh, what's he doing? He's leaving. What is this? At that point, yeah, you're right. There weren't that many new funds getting started. It was more of a big deal. Now it's like new fund every day is being announced. But back then it was, it kind of caused some waves. So I kind of stored that away in my mind, and I decided, to go back to Stanford to get my MBA. Went to the GSB. Was thinking about what to do next. I was actually kind of more thinking going back into the startup world, maybe starting a company or joining a tech company. I was actually interviewing at SpaceX at the time and
Mhm.
a bunch of other things. So I saw that Javelin and Jed, they were hiring a principal level person. And since I knew him and I knew him through the DFJ network, I decided to have a conversation to see what it was all about. And honestly, it was like the perfect storm of like criteria that a venture capital fund needed to have for me to join at the time in terms of where my mindset was at. It was two former entrepreneurs, as you said, like very successful. Noah started Keyhole, co-founded Keyhole, which is, acquired Google's third acquisition and became Google Earth. And then he built like, essentially Google Apps there. And then Jed had Move.com, and they were building Javelin in this very like scrappy way that was very opposite of what I was seeing on Sand Hill Road, which, it has a little bit of a ivory tower type of feel to it and mahogany wood everywhere and everything's super nice. And, I think they were building a fund that was very scrappy by entrepreneurs for entrepreneurs, investing specifically in what was a novel concept at the time. It's kind of a well-known concept now, but at that time in 2008, 2009 timeframe, it was called the Series A gap, right? You had a
Mhm.
lot of, angel investors and seed funds emerging. Sandhill Series A funds were going more upmarket, so there was this gap in that $2 to $8 million round size zone that was a bit underserved in terms of institutional funds. And so for me, I like the fact that it was that early stage and you could really partner up with entrepreneurs and help them in that company building process. So as a, former entrepreneur, somebody that was still thinking about the entrepreneurial path, that was a good sort of middle ground where I could feel like I was still scratching that itch and still a part of that journey and that foundation building. So I love that. And the fact that Javelin was brand new, nobody had known about it. So I would be getting in on the ground floor and helping build the brand, taking on a lot of responsibility, being able to lead my own deals and sit on boards pretty early in my career. That was what was laid out in front of me, and I thought that was a really unique combination. So I took the plunge. I joined full time in 2011. I was very fortunate. My and this was off of the advice of actually one of my mentors, Andy Ratcliffe. He said something in one of our classes that I still remember to this day, and it really ties into the the power law of venture capital. And that is that people don't remember your failures; they remember your successes.
Mhm.
And so don't be shy, right? There's a lot of risk involved in venture capital, right? And you can do your best in terms of your methodology of how you select founders, and we do that. At the end of the day, you got to take some shots on goal and not
Mhm.
be too gun shy because you could like make excuses and reasons for not investing in a company all day long and talk yourself out of every deal. And so I took that to heart, and I was fortunate enough. I think the second deal that I sourced and helped lead was Thumbtack, and that was like at the end of my first year at Javelin, it was end of 2011, and that ended up being a really great out. It hasn't exited yet, but it's been one of our best performing companies and a huge driver of value. And that really kind of helped me sort of cement myself in terms of my career and help my trajectory going forward. So that was like a very pivotal moment is starting to do deals and then getting a good one early on in my career. So that was good. Yeah, that was good. That helps. So
I feel like you said, like, both of your partners are entrepreneurs, and then that gives it like, that makes it really attractive to build it instead of like the more fancy way, but like more like, from the ground up, scrappy way kind of. And then you also get like the exposure to, do deals and then like sitting on boards and then like just, accelerate your personal growth. I'm curious, like, what do you identify as your like unfair advantage in a way that both like what you select as your career moves that and but also like being at a fund, like since like those two people are successful entrepreneurs, like how do you kind of position yourself to be like, hey, I will be this person who adds value?
we're, in terms of a fund, we're equal partners, and like I
Mhm.
think, we truly do act like a team there. It's not
Mhm.
like you do this, we do that,
Mhm.
and like you just kind of divide everything together. Like
Mhm.
we don't really take that approach. So obviously some of us sit on,
Mhm.
one of us will take a lead on the deal and sit on the boards, right? But
Mhm.
we all know what's going on with each other's companies, and sometimes we'll double up on a deal. So it is very much like a team dynamic. But to directly answer your question in terms of my unfair advantage, I think it's back to this kind of scrappiness idea that like no job is too small, right? And I think that we're kind of covering that when we're talking about the recruiting piece. Um, I I just really love and thrive off of the concept of delivering tangible
Mhm.
value to companies. Like a lot of VCs, they'll say, "Okay, I'm going to invest, and then I want to give you strategic advice, and I'll see you at the board meeting, and we'll solve all the world's problems there, right?" Like, which is great. I love doing that. Like I love you know providing the strategic advice as well, and really helping companies map out the next 12 to 24 months of what they need to accomplish and how to work backwards. But I also do really enjoy, and this is the entrepreneur in me, like the day-to-day struggles and operational intricacies that are going on and how I could help there. And some entrepreneurs don't like that, right? They want their VCs to be completely like hands off and see you at the board meeting, which is fine. We don't really, we won't jive then really well. Like we want to truly partner up with founders who want to give us homework. Like, actually, here you go. I need you to help me with this. Go do it. So, and it's a balance. Like, you've got to do it in a way that's not like overbearing, and more receptive. And hey, use me as an extension of the team, right?
Mhm.
And so we try to really like convey that, and it's a way that we make founders comfortable with taking our capital in the
Mhm.
first place, is they see that we are true partners because one, we've walked the walk as entrepreneurs ourselves. We have our references obviously with our existing founders who will go back and consistently, I mean, this is what we strive for. We want them to say, Javelin was my most helpful investor from day one, really. Ideally, they'll also say that there was no job too small that they wouldn't help us with, whether it was something on the recruiting side. We constantly get involved with product strategy discussions, business model iteration. I mean, Thumbtack and MasterClass had no business models when we
Mhm.
when we invested in those companies, right? So kind of help them think through that. So I think that's I do think that's an unfair advantage, is just that ability and desire to do a bit of the grunt work, right? And the other one is, just like not honestly not taking myself too seriously. This is some advice I got from Peter Wendell, is like, you got to be in venture, be humble and self-deprecating, because you don't want to be like have that idea that you're the smartest guy in the room or smartest person in the room. Like, that's nobody likes that, and founders can they get turned off by that. So I think, and I truly do believe this, like, that the founders are the ones that are setting the vision. They're the ones that are building the future. We're there to help them, to help them along the way, be service providers. And let's not pretend like we know everything, right? Which we absolutely do not. So, so be humble, show humility through hard work, and don't be an asshole. Like, that already right there will put you in the top third of venture capitalists, I think.
You mentioned that like so there's like a couple of things that I found really interesting is what you said was like, you guys were not really trying to beat like, the Sequoia or benchmark of the world, but you try to invest early, taking on more risk, and then you feel more comfortable doing it that way. And then on the other part is like I feel like one of the big part is like you guys really pay attention to if the company is kind of like stingy or like having saving money instead of like spending a lot of money onto like marketing. So for example, Thumbtack, they already kind of like trend in terms of like, SEO. Their SEO is pretty great. And as well as like
Hmm.
for MasterClass, like David would just already collected, all the yeses from like all these
Yep.
celebrities. So without like, having a lot of budget and stuff. Like do you feel like this stingy mentality or like I guess like being a scrappy founder, do you feel like it's a really good character or do you feel like the other way around is like better? Because I'm super stingy or like a scrappy myself, like because of I'm a bootstrap person. So
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
I felt like, everything I did have to make money for my business.
Yep.
Otherwise the business is gonna die. But on the other hand, like, I've seen my competitors does they just like spending X amount of dollar on marketing themselves, like speaking at every panel and stuff like that. So do you feel like the other way around is like a good approach? And the other
Yep.
part is like, how do you kind of like establish the company's brand to attract like better founders? Because I think like, nowadays, like you mentioned that like your firm is not like one of these like VC style who tweets every day.
Yeah.
But I feel like nowadays every VC tweets every day. Not every, but like I'll say like at least half people's job is like tweeting or like hiring a PR company that just like does that for them.
Hmm.
I'm curious, like, how do you kind of like, what are some tangible way that you use to make sure that like when it comes to starting a company, like startup founders come to you?
To answer the sort of scrappy question, I think you have to start with that. And it's a
Mhm.
really, really good question. I mean, I think you're really hitting to the heart of the matter in a way, because I think you start there because you can, and I think this is one of the jobs that we have as mentors, coaches, investors, is to help the founder throttle, right? When is the right time to get a little bit more aggressive? But it's hard to do it the other way around. If the founder's mindset is like spend, 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 raise a bunch of money, spend, spend, like it's not in their DNA to rein them back in. Like they just they're not going to do it. Like it's just not, it's very hard. But if somebody is like starts with that scrappy side and they're building, a business with great fundamentals and great unit economics, and they're making their dollars last and they have a long runway, it is possible to get them, like once it's sort of proven to them that they have something on their hands, to get a little bit more aggressive. And I'd rather be in that scenario than the opposite one, to be honest with you. So
Mhm.
what I've noticed amongst myself, like for ourselves, when we make decisions, we look for the scrappiness, but they still need to have big dreams and goals and want to go for multi-billion-dollar outcomes. And then sort of our job, the way I see it, is within that sort of seed, Series A, Series B timeline, if they truly find product market fit, like helping them identify that, hey, I think you have product market fit, you need to start thinking about dialing it up. It goes back to the recruiting conversation. A lot of times founders will tell me that I don't need this executive. Like I want to
Mhm.
keep, my burn low, right? And I totally appreciate that. I totally understand where they're coming from. And in fact, I love that they're saying that, because that's sort of the foundation that you need. Uh, but you're not going to scale if you don't do it. So that's where I see sort of one of the most important roles that we play, is to be able to, sort of make them realize that no, you've earned the right through your scrappiness to scale your team, right? And to bring on more people to be able to, to grow the company and get to that next level. So, it's that like rubber band analogy, right? Like it's been used, many, many times. You want it to be stretched, but not as much as possible, but to the point
Mhm.
that it's not, it doesn't break, right? In terms of company resources. So yeah, so that's a really great question, and it's hard. It's hard because sometimes you're pushing back on founders that they should spend more, and they're like, "Why are you making me spend more?" Right? Like,
Mhm.
so that's one part of your question. I think you were asking in terms of how do we end up winning deals, and sort of kind of on the brand side of it. You're right. Like we don't compete with Sequoia or Benchmark or Andreessen. Like if we are, we're doing something really, really wrong, and we're not staying in our zone, in our lane. We need to be investing in the round before that. So, as I mentioned before, we're focused on that late seed, early Series A bucket, which is the $2 to $8 million rounds. So, like a typical check size from us would be 3 to 4 million, and a round size would be 5 to 6 million. That's like a very typical thing. And a lot of those funds will play in that, that zone too. But they'll also do the large Series A and the Series B and the pre-IPO round and everything else. We only do that, and the market knows us as only, investors that focus on that particular stage. And we're really good at helping you sort of build the right foundation and grow into that next stage. So if you want to have a chance to work with us, like you have to talk to us when you're raising a $2 to $8 million round. Otherwise, we're not going to get a chance. Like if you wanted to work with like an Andreessen, you have multiple shots on goal to do that. You could do it at the seed, at the A, at the B, at the C, and that's fine. It's just a little bit of a different approach. And after we've been at it for 12 years now, there's compounding effects in the brand, where a lot of the pre-seed funds and, solo VC funds, they know us, right? They know what we specialize in. So, they'll put us at the top on the list when their companies are raising, 2 to 8 million. A lot of our entrepreneurs, right? We've had over 100 investments that we've made in, the last 12 years. They're going back and starting their next company, or the, employees of those companies are starting companies. They know about Javelin. There's that, compounding brand effect. And our approach has been more, I would say, in terms of network and deal flow, quality over quantity, and that's why we're not like super prolific, you know, um, Twitters, whatever, and we're not blogging every day, right? Or we don't have our podcast, right? Something like that. It's not like authentic to us, and I don't think we'd be that good at it. And maybe we would if we tried it long enough, but it's just not, it's not where we kind of gravitate towards. And instead gravitated towards these more like curated networks, right, of people that understand how we look at companies and understand how we look at the world, and they're constantly sending us companies that have been pre-qualified, right? We do a lot with our kind of like networks that we came from. Like we're very big with, Stanford and their entrepreneurship program, and Berkeley and their entrepreneurship program there. Noah's very active with Google. Like these are like the core networks that we come from. So naturally, we're going to be very, exposed there. But in terms of, just playing in the venture game, I think it's specialization in terms of our stage, like the stage specialty, and having, 12 years of entrepreneurs and funds that we co-invest with just know about us and, our style and the kind of companies we like, and sort of cultivate those networks. That's been more of our approach.
What are some ways or like tangible steps that you took to cultivate this network? Because I think when you mention like Stanford or Berkeley or Google network, it's competitive.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's just so many like,
Yeah.
from solo GP to big name VC to even I know the undergrads there start writing angel checks to
Hmm.
their classmates. Like, how do you guys like kind of,
Yeah.
establish yourself in those
Yeah, well,
ecosystem?
yeah, I think you're right. Those networks are pretty competitive. And I think again, because we come from them, it's a little bit more natural for us to play there. So we'll sponsor basis competition or UC launch with Berkeley, right? And just see all the, like the companies that are coming through, whether it's the business school or the undergrad population. Like I said, the Mayfield Fellows Network, which is a Stanford group, like just, being involved, being a part of it, mentoring there. That's something that we do proactively. But in terms of kind of cultivating our kind of curated networks, like we have certain funds that are pre-seed funds that we love, that we really like, that we will proactively talk to them and understand what companies are being funded and understanding what's going on there. I'll give you an example. Actually, Thumbtack, right? The way I actually learned about them when they were raising their Series A, and they have this like famous story of where they went out and they got 50 no's from Silicon Valley
Mhm.
VCs, and we were like the first fund that said yes essentially to them. The way I even learned about that is I went to talk to Harrison Metal, which is Michael Deering's fund, and my good buddy from Stanford Business School, David Rogier, was a principal there. And so we had lunch and we were talking shop and talking about investments, and he told me, hey, Thumbtack's actually raising a round, which I had heard about. I heard about Thumbtack. I knew who they were at that time, but I thought they were raising like a $10 million round. But they went out to market and they couldn't raise it. Like there was too much money for, for where they were as a company in terms of progress. So they decided to raise a $5 million round, which is in our sweet spot. He kind of gave me, the tip on that, made the intro to Marco, the founder. We moved really fast and we loved the deal and, made it happen. But it was from that outreach, from those conversations with, those kind of pre-seed type funds where where that opportunity even came from in the first place. We try to do that regularly with with those pre-seed funds and seed funds with our founders. Like we'll cultivate those networks, whether it's dinners and constant catch-ups and things like that. So there's no like magic to it. Again, it's just being staying on top of it. And yeah, and that's what's worked well for us.
I have a spontaneous question,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
okay, let's say if you and I starting a company today, how should we go about raising funding?
I think the approach would be have a very clear, sort of definition of the space that you're trying to approach, because we're talking about like what stage you're in as a company, right? So I'm very much of the philosophy of like raise as much as you need to get to
Mhm.
the next milestone, and then and then build from there, right? And so if you and I were starting a company, we would be pretty early on in that journey, right? And so what you really need is somebody to take a bet on us as founders, right? And our skill set and our sort of founder to market fit. Like how adept are we at this particular problem set or set of problems that we potentially could try to solve? A lot of times, the first idea that you have isn't the idea that you're going to end up scaling, right? You might have to iterate through it a lot of times. So again, in that very early pre-seed point, I think team is of utmost importance and a big growing market. The actual product idea is a little bit less important. It's got to be like interesting enough, right? And I think the our abilities to iterate, to show that we're flexible of mind and process, that we can iterate through many, many different concepts and ideas, is what I would be demonstrating to investors early on and in an interesting market. So if we were, obviously right now, like AI is all the rage, we're doing something cool in AI, right? We got some ideas, but I would say that, like, at least if we had the background for it, you had built an AI company, I was a PhD in ML and NLP or something like that. Okay, that checks that box, right? And then talk about what is our process for iterating through ideas. Like, here's our first idea, here's how we're going to figure out whether it's viable or not. And if it's not, this is the direction that we're going to continue iterating towards. That's what I would be conveying to pre-seed investors who are looking to, write a $500 to $1 million check. And that's all I would raise at that point. And then I would show them that progress and get to an idea that you think is going to be the one that you build a company around. And then we could talk about, a whole other stage of investing. But you asked me a specific question about what would you and I do right now. So that's what I would do.
I think that's a great answer because
Yeah.
I feel like, when you hear so many people's success story, but like it's actually like, when it comes down to the pitch or how do you pitch people or like, should I be flexible about the original idea or not is actually really important because,
Hmm.
like when you're actually doing it, it's very different than like when you're hearing about it, when people talk about it. I'm curious, like, should we let's say like going back to this example, let's say should we create an Excel sheet on the VC's name and then like who may able to make an introduction to us, or how should we approach this as a system to actually accomplish at like a successfully
Hmm.
racing, right? Like, so you mentioned like
Yeah.
Thumbtack was introduced by the founder of MasterClass, and the
I like
MasterClass
that you put that
person
together
was
though.
like,
That's good. Yeah.
yeah, so and
Yeah.
then the MasterClass person was your like school
Right.
GSB
Yeah.
buddy. And then okay, so how do you kind of like navigate these kind of relationship when you are raising money? And like I guess like by navigate I mean like, do you create like an Excel sheet? And then also
Yeah.
like, the Thumbtack person raised like, chatted with like 50 VCs before and they have to have 50 VC to chat with in the first place. How do you kind of like kind of like creating this kind of buzz for the masterclass person to introduce them to you,
Hmm.
as
Yeah.
well as like to get to the masterclass
Yeah.
person in the first place?
Yeah. I guess like tactically speaking, like just let's take it a step further. Like you're a seed or Series A company, you probably already have some investors around you. Maybe you have some angel investors, some entrepreneurs. Maybe you have a pre-seed fund or something. I mean, literally, what happens, just super tactically speaking, is before a round is raised, everybody puts together, like you said, a spreadsheet of all the target funds, right, that they think would be good fits. You circulate that list with all of your, call it your cap table, whoever's already involved with the company, advisors, investors, potential employee, like maybe maybe other employees or something like that. Probably not employees actually, but probably don't have that many employees anyways. But so you go through the list, you populate it, and then you say who's got the best connection into that particular firm, and then you go and explore whether that firm wants to talk to you, and then you set up those meetings, right? So it's a very standard networks of networks kind of exercise there. But what you're trying to do is avoid going in cold. You're always trying to go in warm through one of these connections. And so one of the things that we actually are very, religious about at Javelin, when we lead a round, we never hog the round. We like to say it's a $5 million round. We'll do three, if maybe we'll do 2.5, and the rest of it, we want to include as many value added people as possible. It could be firms, but even better if they're entrepreneurs, like are writing 50K to 100K checks who come with their own networks. And the best intro into a VC fund isn't other VCs. It's an entrepreneur, especially an entrepreneur they've backed. Like that is the best possible intro you can get. And so we'll proactively introduce a new company to founders and entrepreneurs that we've worked with and that we respect and we know really well to join those rounds because we know that they're going to provide much more value pound for pound in terms of the check size that they write going forward in terms of advice, in terms of potential hiring, and in terms of those investor introductions down the road. And so that's one way to kind of help in the future fundraise is by actually putting the pieces together in the current fundraise to maximize your chances of talking to the right people later on. Obviously, the company has to perform and execute in the meantime, otherwise none of it matters. But that's just kind of a one tactic that we would encourage.
Because as a founder or like first time founder, you went to your friends who are, second time founder or something. Let's say they invest in your company and then, but it's like their own money. So they're also founders, although they may raise some money, but like, it's still their own money they put in you. What if your company failed and then like the people, like, would you like, if you start a second company, would you still go to the person who introduced you to XYZ again? Or like, also
Yeah.
like, I feel like it's a really exhaustion of like, reaching out to like a million people that because of like each time you reach out to them, like people may take it as like, you owe me like a favor or something.
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
I hope not is the question. I think what I've been in this situation before. I tried to get a company off the ground after OOMA was this online video dating site, and I ended up raising kind of angel capital for it, and frankly it didn't go anywhere, and so I lost their money, and I felt horrible. Like utterly, I still do to this day. I like it let like just talking about it like made my gut wrench a little bit right now, that I lost their capital, and I've apologized so many times profusely since then. They've said like, look, we knew we were taking a risky bet, and sort of our mindset was like we're going to bet on you, and if it doesn't work out, we're prepared to lose that money. That's okay. And so in their case, even though I still feel bad about it, they were sort of prepared for that. And so I think you need to kind of do some qualifying if you're taking money from friends, ideally not family. You don't want to like that's a whole other problem area there. But from people that know you and are willing to bet on you, like you should say, look, this is money that you should be willing to lose, right? Like this is really risky. I'm gonna give it my all. I'm gonna grind it out and do my best. And I really believe in this vision. But there's a lot of gravity and a lot of inertia downward for any startup. That's why it's such a risky thing. And only invest money that you're comfortable losing. I would have those frank conversations, to be honest with you, like with people that are like close to you, right? Like everyone really, but I think most professional angel investors know that. Like you don't need to talk to them about it. If they've done enough deals, like they understand what it's all about. If you're taking money from your best friend or something like that, I would have that conversation just so that they understand what they're getting into.
yeah, I completely agree with you, by the way. And I also, that was in my research. It's called Say Hey Hey, that
Hmm.
company.
Yeah,
That's really
yeah.
interesting. And okay, so I'm curious, like, so when you invest in Thumbtack, beside like your friend, David, who kind of like gave some credit on like, because you know him. So when he introduced you to a company, you may like, feel like this is a legit company. And what are some other, like, do you feel like it was like in the first minute you knew this is like a good company, or do you have to have multiple
Yeah,
conversations with people
right.
to vet this?
Yeah, I think in that case it was like kind of within the first meeting we had a sense of this company's special. Part of it we were lucky. I mean, we're very lucky that we were the fund that they happened to meet with as they decided to raise less money. So we were sort of like, looking at a company that thought it was worthy of a $10 million round, but now they're raising five. So okay, so like I said, we didn't have to be the smartest people in the room to recognize that. That said, there were a couple of things that we identified as a group that they were really good at, and it actually ties into one of the prior topics we were talking about. Is that they actually had a product, they had a marketplace that was working. People were going on Thumbtack, which is a marketplace for consumers to find service professionals like roofers, plumbers, cleaners, whatever. And so they had people coming in and making those matches and filling and creating jobs, and people were filling those jobs at a pretty good rate, but they weren't monetizing anything yet. So it was sort of a big bet on the business model there. And I remember this distinctly. We would ask them all these metrics questions, like what about this number? What about that number? What about if you cut the data this way? And their answer was, I don't know, but we know how to find out. And they would pull up this dashboard that was internally built. This is before, now there's like third-party tools. They actually built their own internal dashboards that they were able to plug in, some variables, some numbers, and get the answers to our questions right away. And our minds were blown. Like this company, which was seed, they had raised like 1.2 million prior to that, like 2 years prior to that. And you would think that, most people would invest that in go to market and hiring a team. They invested it in this tool, which was sort of their way of understanding everything that was going on with their business, like the flight controls of their business, and allowing them to run lots of different tests, lots of different optimizations, and get to the right answer. So to us, it said that, hey, we don't know all the answers, but we have a process and a philosophy internally and the tools to iterate, through 1,000 different experiments to get to the right answer over time. And so that was actually what made us most excited about it, is that these guys they knew how to scale the business through like small little optimizations that compound over time. And so that ultimately made us comfortable with the bet. And yeah, we moved really fast. I mean, that deal got done, within a week or two. We got a lot of conviction. And yeah, it took several meetings, right? We still had to meet the team and, you know, uh, due diligence and do back channel checks and all that. But we did it really fast, So
Okay, so when you like after you decided to like invest in Thumbtack and then like what do you feel like separate them from being like a regular startup that you have invested in to, took off really fast? Because right now they are they have raised like over hundreds of millions of dollars. And like what do you think kind of like make them stand out among like other portfolio companies, that like what make
yeah.
them grow so fast?
Yeah, one of the things that we use as criteria Javelin, right? This goes to your point that we invest earlier than other funds, so we have to kind of develop our own methodology
Mhm.
of understanding which companies to bet on because we're taking on more risk. We actually have a name for this strategy. It's called signal before traction.
Mm.
Um, and one of the key tenets of that methodology is there's lots of things, to be honest with you, and a lot of them are standard stuff that a lot of VC funds have, like you know market size, right, unique
Mhm.
team, the defensible advantages, all this. I think the one kind of really unique lens that we have is the sort of maniacal focus on the business model and distribution strategy to make sure that they have some leverage built in so that these companies can scale to large levels of revenue without raising a lot of capital, so that the path forward is less dilutive for everybody and they can
Mhm.
get further on the smaller amount of dollars that we're investing. And each company is going to have a different, kind of strategy to that. And so we look for that. So in Thumbtack's case, it was SEO. Like they were incredible at SEO. They were like the gurus of the valley on that. And that really stood out to us, right? In addition to what I mentioned earlier, where it was sort of this, you know, um, hypothesis driven, fast, rapid iteration testing to find the right answers. In addition, they have this really scalable go-to-market model that allowed them to attract traffic pretty much for free and take advantage of all the organic search that was going on, on Google around local service provider inquiries, which was monstrous in terms of the volume. And so they took advantage of that and were able to scale up to large levels of revenue without spending a ton of money on marketing. And that's what made them a really special, and still, still to this point, it's a really special company. Sequoia ended up doing the Series B, and then I believe Tiger did the next round, and Google Capital, and and on and on. So that's yeah, that was that. Like, to give another example, like with MasterClass, again, we invested in MasterClass in 2014 before they launched, and they didn't even have a brand, they didn't have revenue, they didn't have anything. Obviously, as you pointed out, I knew the founder pretty well, so we had confidence in him. But in terms of the sort of leveraged distribution model and business model that we were looking for, one is he was able to go out and get the first 10 celebrities to say yes without having any credibility, without having any brand or revenue to show for. And it just goes straight to like founder capability, founder charisma to be able to get those first few names to say yes, which got the whole supply side of the marketplace and the flywheel humming, and kind of the first crank of the flywheel going, which was incredible to see and was a great signal. And then number two is more kind of, theoretical, but we thought that by getting these instructors who have their own large followings, that they would be able to generate a lot of earned media, a lot of press, and a lot of organic traffic, in addition to whatever they were paying for marketing eventually, that would cause this big halo effect that would depress the blended customer acquisition cost over time. And so that was sort of like a leverage distribution model that we were looking for, that we thought this company could get to large scales of revenue without a lot of capital invested. Again, for each company, it could be B2B, it could be, bottoms up SaaS, it could be a marketplace, it could be a consumer e-commerce business. We invest across all those, kind of categories, but we're looking for that unique business model distribution strategy that allows that capital efficient growth. And that's very important to us. And especially in this market, that's kind of like the way to survive, right? And
Mhm.
get to the other side.
Totally. When you were like chatting with like the founder of MasterClass or the founder of Thumbtack, like, do you feel like they are really good business people, or do you feel like they're just domain expertise, like experts?
They didn't come from these industries. The Thumbtack founders were like in government before. One of the co-founders,
Mhm.
Jonathan Swanson, worked in the White House prior to starting Thumbtack, and Marco, I think he was working on at a nonprofit, I believe. And then, like David from MasterClass was at Harrison Metal. He was a VC. Then, other than him being from LA, which is where I live, there wasn't any like sort of Hollywood thing going on with him prior to that. So I think it was more like they were just really talented, scrappy founders. Goes back to that scrappy point. Like they really demonstrated the ability to learn fast, iterate quickly, surround themselves with great people early on, be humble about it, be intellectually honest. It was really those traits. It wasn't like they knew much about the markets that they were operating in. I mean, they were passionate about solving those problems, but they didn't have any like secret advantages, I would say.
Like, how did the founder of MasterClass kind of like sign the 10 celebrity clients? Also, how did you
Great
meet Joseph
question.
Gordon-Levitt?
Oh
Like,
yeah.
that's
Okay, yeah.
just on the celebrity part.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, that's the thing that really blew our minds, right, when we met MasterClass or talked to them about this concept was how indeed did you get that, right? And I think it comes down to the fact that he was so passionate about solving this, problem of access to great talent. Like him and I, we went to the Stanford Business School. We had literally the best people in the world come
Mhm,
through do talks, right?
mhm,
But like that's unfair. Like why are we the only ones? If you don't live in Silicon Valley, you don't have that access. If you don't go to Stanford, you don't have that access. So let's give that access to everybody. Like, that's what they called, the tagline of the company for a while was democratizing access to genius, right? And so he was also driven by the fact his grandmother was a Holocaust survivor, and her famous quote was, the only thing they can't take away from you is education, is your education.
mhm,
And so he's really passionate about this topic. And so when he went to talk to these celebrities, I think they saw the fact that he was really genuine about it. And you got to remember, they come from a world where everyone's trying to hawk products at them, and it's so inauthentic, and everyone's trying to use them, to get ahead or whatever.
mhm,
And you have this person that's, credible, comes from a great background, who's really trying to solve this kind of problem, right, of providing a great education across the globe and us honestly helping them build their own brands and their own legacies and preserving their minds for eons to come, right? For
mhm,
generations to come. He was able to sell that vision, right? So it comes back to, being able to be authentic, be passionate and be able to sell well, right?
mhm.
And he was able to do that. But that's a great question. I mean, that to us, it was part of the magic of the company was how are you able to do this? How did you get this done? That's how I perceive it. He might have some other answers, but that's my perception of it. So
Nice.
yeah.
So like you also invest in like Joseph Gordon-Levitt startup, and then that startup was acquired by the Masterclass team. So like like how did you first of all, how did you meet him? And then like is this like another, being in LA situation?
No,
Or
I
did
think
he
that
cold
was
reach to
it's
you?
part
Like
of these like intertwined networks thing that I was mentioning earlier where
it's an
like
LA thing.
it's
I
not
get
an
it.
no, this is actually was not an LA thing. This is more of like a Silicon Valley thing. But it was actually one of the co-founders of MasterClass knew his wife. Actually, I believe we did. Okay, to your point, we didn't meet at some event in LA. So that if you want to
It's an
call it an
LA
LA
thing.
thing,
Yeah.
it was an LA thing. But we ended up like we chatted for like 5 minutes, made the connection, and then I didn't talk to him for like a year, and then we were both at the TED conference actually in Vancouver. And so we met up there and had a longer chat, and he knew that I was involved with MasterClass. And so he told me about his vision for HitRecord, and we hit it off and, kind of took it from there. And I worked together for the last 4 years. And then there was just such a great synergy between HitRecord and MasterClass that that team and Joseph is part of the MasterClass team now. So it's come full circle. But again, it goes back to all these intertwined networks. That was really via MasterClass. So in a way, it sort of came full circle. So
What do you think about like celebrity backed or like celebrity funded startup? Because nowadays, like we can see the shift of like creator economy. Like Mr. Beast is on the cover of Forbes, like the company is worth like, at 1.5
yeah,
billion. And then, all these celebrities like from Kylie Jenner to like Hailey
right.
Bieber to like literally everybody has their own brand now.
Yeah.
Um, do you think this celebrity-led tech company would work as well as like the technology drive to e-commerce business?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's gotta be again, it's gotta re the celebrity piece of it has to reinforce the brand in a way. And like the Kylie thing, makes sense in a lot of ways. The Jessica Alba and Honest Company, makes sense. But if it's sort of like, celebrity partnering with someone to make a gaming company, like to me, that doesn't make much sense, right? Or even some like e-commerce business that isn't authentic to that celebrity. So just kind of, yeah, it totally depends on the situation. I do think that there's promise there. I think it's more around, D2C side and, kind of branding, consumer brands. I think if you have the right sort of alignment there, it would be interesting. But frankly, I mean, if I were looking at a celebrity-driven company, I would be looking for what unfair advantage does a celebrity provide on a sustainable, continuous basis, and also who are they partnering with to run that business. So it's sort of like the Brian Lee, Jessica Alba combination, right? That made perfect sense, right? She's got
Mhm.
the brand authenticity as a mom, and passion for the products, and Brian's like the operator, right? Like that's a great combination. So that to me makes a ton of sense. Joe in HitRecord, the company that we backed, very passionate about collaborative creativity, community building. That's what he's all about, right? And getting more people into the creative process.
Mhm.
And he happens to be just a brilliant guy in general, and was actually very good at operating in the business, but he also had a ton of help, right? He had his partner Jared, who was the president and kind of day-to-day operations. We brought in helped them bring in some executives as well. And so sort of surrounding them. It's not like the celebrity at the center of it necessarily, right? And in Joe's case, he was kind of an unfair advantage because he was such a good cultivator of that community. Obviously the Kylie example is a great one because, her reach and her brand around makeup is like insane, right? But she's not sitting there like running the company, right? So, so I
Mhm.
think it's got to be the right sort of combination between a great operator and a celebrity that's authentic to that particular product, and ideally a big enough market opportunity, right? So that's how I would kind of look at it. There's a lot of noise right now, to be honest with you. There's a lot of noise. You got to be really discerning, but there's a few gems out there that are celebrity led. In general, don't love the idea of betting on one persona. Want to diversify your bets, right? It's sort of like, like look at MasterClass. Like they're not about one celebrity. They're about a concept, and there's like hundreds of them, right? And so to me, that feels better than like betting on one particular celebrity and their brand, right? I'd rather do deals like that, kind of more of a diversified portfolio, right?
Mhm.
Then you're betting on one particular, person to fully push the company. There's been so many disasters on that side as well. So you just got to be really careful there because it is tempting. It is tempting.
I feel like MasterClass could have been a really successful Netflix TV show, right? Like it could be like a hit show because it's a content company. How do you see it from like building its own platform benefiting the company?
Yeah, well, like I think it's like any sort of question around why doesn't said bigger company do this? I think it's the drive and focus of a team that's dedicated to a particular task at hand. And in this case, it's, online education. Like what they're really trying to do is build a company and a platform that is on the education to entertainment spectrum. There's actually more on the, I would say, entertainment side with some educational components as well. So it's more of like aspirational, right? That's been the origin and the start of MasterClass, which means that, they have, I think, a broader, larger addressable market, right? That, because it has that kind of entertainment component. I think over time, they're going to go deeper on education, and they're also going to go broader on entertainment. So you'll see just a lot of different content types versus what you currently see there today, which is kind of more of like the same type of format, the same thing, like a person sitting in the chair and talking to you. So I do expect it to really broaden in terms of its kind of offerings over time. If it was just a Netflix show, right, then it would be buried with all the other Netflix content, right?
Mhm.
Whereas everything that we do within the product is geared around this notion of inspiring people, of helping them build tangible skills, right? And just that educational umbrella. I think that's important to make sure that that lives within a cohesive experience, because there's more to it than just the video content, right? It's how you consume it. How do you recommend related types of content to a user? How do you help them along the way of that educational journey in terms of, workbooks or interactive content or community that ends up helping you along the way, right? So it's
Mhm.
the instructor says something, right, and takes you through a journey, but it's actually the community part of it that might make those learnings more tangible for you. And so there's a lot of pieces of the product that are geared around that educational journey that I think would not, be able to come out as strongly if they were buried inside of a product that was about, you know, every like so many different things like Netflix is, right? So I think it needs to be a focused product, in
Mhm.
my opinion. And really, like if you think about like the subscription that SVOD services have done, right? They unbundled cable, right? You've got, obviously, Netflix and Hulu, Apple Plus and the like. Who has done that for the educational content? Think of like National Geographic and Discovery, all those kind of companies. They're trying to do it, but they're like all these they're very old world media businesses. So we feel like the opportunity for MasterClass is to kind of be the company that essentially unbundles that educational edutainment segment and brings it online, and digitize it, frankly, for posterity, for not only people all over the globe today, but for, hundreds of years to come. Like it's kind of spine-tingling to think about the possibilities there, because people 500 years from now can learn from the minds of today and going forward directly, not from books or, just reading secondhand accounts of like what Shakespeare said, right, or what Aristotle was talking about, and who knows what they were really thinking. You could actually, get that direct information from them. So that's pretty cool. So it's a pretty legacy. I think it's a legacy defining company for a lot of the people that are involved with it, and that's how we think about it.
As a investor, you also like as someone like you as an MD at a fund, you also have to raise money from LPs. Like, what was it like maybe when you first started, and then what is it like now? Like, I assume since you guys already have a lot of track record, it's probably really different than when you first joined 1 year old fund, right? Like, so like what is it like? And then, nowadays like the venture ecosystem has changed so much. So like, some funds having like at the beginning, I assume like maybe 10 years ago, everybody's investing in everything. Nowadays, like people have specific sector that they're passionate about. Like, how do you kind of like manage like the fundraising aspect of building the fund?
Yeah, yeah, it's a great question. And the Javelin, has a bit of a unique kind of situation there, so won't go into too many details on that, but we'll kind of sort of provide kind of a general sense of what we've seen in the in the broader fundraising markets. One thing that has really changed in the last 10 years. There's probably more, but I've seen sort of like three kind of shifts in terms of LPs and their relations to GPs. Two I think are really healthy, and one of like not so much, So I think the healthy ones, the healthy ones in my opinion are, there's been this added desire from an LP standpoint to, have an interest in co-investing or investing directly into our underlying companies.
Mhm.
Part of that I think was driven by the craze that we just kind of got out of, because everyone's like, I want to be a part of that company. But I think the good part of that hopefully does not go away, and I think there's still a question mark whether desire and interest will stay. But what I like about it, and what I've noticed, especially in our own fundraising conversations, is that there's this genuine desire of a lot of LPs to dig deeper into the specific companies that are driving value in your fund performance and understand more about those companies. Like what is, the business model there, or what are the growth prospects? And because we might want to invest in it directly, or maybe through your pro rata participation and through an SPV. And I think that's awesome when you have LPs who are not just looking at high level metrics of fund performance and judging you based on that, but also like let me actually look into the specific companies. And to be clear, I think a lot of the best LPs historically have always done that. But I think recently, there's been a lot more, the LP universe has definitely expanded, and, more family offices and high net worth individuals that are joining the fray, and in addition to sovereign wealth funds. And it's just become it's a pretty big pool. The fact that more of those folks are digging into the underlying value is a good thing. They'll understand fund portfolios better. They'll be able to underwrite funds that are actually doing well, but maybe the numbers don't say it yet, or funds that are marked really well, but actually have no,
Mhm.
like the companies aren't really that good, right? So
Mhm.
you'll avoid those, messes too. So I think that's a really kind of good thing that's happened. over the last few years. I think the other good thing that's happened is comfort with emerging managers and kind of this solo, solo capitalist concept, right?
Mhm.
Of like one person spinning out of a fund. I think it's great. You're giving more people an opportunity to become investors. A lot of the times those funds do really well, especially as first time funds, because they're able to get access to deals, not as a lead, which it's easier because you're not competing with Sequoia on a deal. You're trying to get into that deal, and that's easier to do if you could provide some unique value and potentially, have a good outcome there. So a lot of LPs have set up emerging manager programs, and I think it's now's a very difficult time to raise money for everybody, but in general, that's been a big shift that I've seen where a lot of emerging managers are starting up and raising 30, $50 million off the bat to kind of get their funds off the ground. And I think that's wonderful for the ecosystem. Means more money, more names on that list of venture capitalists, right, for entrepreneurs to go out and get. And a lot of the times those solo VCs are so hustle oriented, so hardworking. They will talk about rolling up your sleeves. They'll go out of their way to help. And the winners are entrepreneurs. And so I'm like big supporter of that trend. I think the negative trend, which I think is going away now, which is one of the benefits of this downturn. The last 2 years there was just like this comfort that LPs had with shorter fund cycles. You had funds that would raise a mega fund one year, and a year later, 18 months later, come back and raise another one, which is unheard of in the history of venture capital that was going on. But LP sort of just kind of took that as a given, like, okay, I guess that's what we're doing. Let's every 18 months, here's another $1 billion. And a lot of these funds were chasing large AUMs, like essentially manage a lot of capital, and LPs were good with it because times were good, and if we don't invest, they'll get another LP to come in and take our spot. And so there was a little bit of that, FOMO dynamic going on. And I think that's not good. And so right now, what we're hearing from LPs is kind of a reversion back to classic venture capital, like what venture capital has been historically, frankly, funds with smaller AUM, with smaller fund sizes, which is good because it's discipline, and you're betting on returns versus like in terms of a VC, you're not trying to milk, the management fee. You're trying to actually deliver great outcomes. So the incentives are just way more aligned with everybody, and you get longer fund cycles. So instead of coming back every year, year and a half, 3.5 years, right? That's historically what it's been, right, in venture capital, and we went away for that for the last like 3 years. Now we're kind of coming back to it, and LPs want to see that again. And I think that's a really good thing because again, it instills discipline. Not everybody gets a check, right? Like as an entrepreneur, the bar is going to definitely be higher for founders to raise because VCs are going to be sitting on their funds because they don't want to go out to market too soon because they know that the reaction from the LP community isn't going to be too good. That was a negative that's now being corrected in the current market, which I think is really healthy and really good.
Is the funds that like perform the best when they have like the most amount of buzz? Like because of like, we see certain funds that's like super well known, but like to LPs, are they like the best performing funds?
Not always. I would say I haven't seen like an official study on this. My gut is it's not correlated. I think it works well for some funds, and I know a lot of funds that are totally under the radar. They've never tweeted in their lives, and they've got
Mhm.
phenomenal performance, like incredible performance. Again, I think it comes back to authenticity. If it works for some funds to be out there and, be very buzzy, and that's good for their deal flow. Like I'm not saying that that's not going to deliver a good return. Probably for a lot of funds it will deliver a good return, but I also know a lot of funds that do it a different way, right? So I think you just got to just, do what works for you as an investor. So I don't think it's a requirement. You don't need to be buzzy to be successful in venture capital. That's my take. Well, I'm sure lots of people would disagree with me on that, but that's how I see it.
Because in VC, like the feedback cycle is so long, when you invest in something like this year, like, 7, 8 years later, you may able to see the results. So assuming, let's say if a fund that raised like 1 billion and then like, a year and a half later, they're raising another round, like how can the LP
Yeah.
tell like any of these like
Very
returns?
good
So
question. Yeah, that's a very, that is the question. I mean, if you've got billions of dollars in your fund, like you raised a multi-billion-dollar fund, think about what you need to deliver in terms of an outcome to return like a 3x on that. If you have $1 billion fund, you need 3 billion, right? And that's in terms of the venture piece of it, right? So, you need like, 4 Figmas per fund. I don't know, like maybe that's a bad example, but like you need like companies at that scale You need multiple, not just one. Like for us, we're 100, each fund is 125 million. Our goal is to get like 2 to 3 per fund. 1 to 2 will be plenty actually for us. That delivers like multiples upon multiples of our fund. Like, 1 or 2 is fine. Obviously we want to get as many as possible. But for a mega fund, like they need you know many of those, right, to even like have a shot at a good return. It's a really good question. It's a really good question. I don't know. I don't play in that world. So I don't know how, how all the returns, look, for them. A lot of the ones that are able to raise those mega funds, they do have a long track record, so they can point back to like, the billion-dollar fund that was raised, 15 years ago and say, look how we did there, so let's keep it going, right? But they're certainly not pointing back to the last fund, even the fund before that, because yeah, like you said, there's not probably much to show in terms of progress yet, right? Because it takes a long time. It's not even 7 to 8 years anymore. Now it's longer. It's like 10 to 11 years is more like it.
Do you feel like the early stage investing is kind of like a numbers game, or is there any actually scientific method to it?
I think it's both. I mean, I think you need a certain amount of shots on goal. I think you need at our stage, you need like 20, I would say 25 to 30 investments in a fund to have enough diversification. That part of it is, I guess you call it out a numbers game, but like you still have to be very discerning in terms of what you put in it, right? So that part is where the pattern matching and the skill kind of comes in. And then obviously once you put those, companies in it, you've got to help them get to the next stage, right? So I think it's a combination of all those factors. It's not just any one of them, right?
Totally. Okay,
Yeah.
so we have a 1 minute fire round to end our podcast.
Okay.
So, number one question, what's your favorite book?
Lord of the Rings.
Who made the biggest impact in your career?
I would say it's David Rozier.
Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Outside of friends or?
It's your party.
Oh, okay. All right. I mean, I would invite my classmates from business school, my high school friends. I'm lucky enough to still maintain friendships from early on in my life. So kind of the spectrum of my friends across high school, college, and business school.
Where can we find you outside of work?
Running around with my 2 kids, soon to be 3 kids. Going to the park with them, going to soccer games with my son, playing chess with my son. Like I do. Like he's become my best friend, and he's 6 years old, so that's my current best friend, my 6-year-old son. We do everything together.
Congratulations on having
you.
another children.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex, for coming on the show today.
This was so much fun. Thank you, Grace. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed it. You asked great questions, and it was really fun. Thank you.